We need to look at Victorian England, which is represented by the reign of Queen Victoria from 1837 to 1901. So this whole second half of the 19th century has this vibe led by Queen Victoria, who you see a little picture of her over on the right-hand side. On the left is the Eiffel Tower. That is in Paris. Don't worry about it for the England portion. Okay. Here we see Queen Victoria and her husband Prince Albert. She was a very a traditional ruler in that she really she liked traditional values. She supported the idea of having a large family. Here you see her with her husband, the prince, but also many of her children. She had quite a few children, got them married to princes and princesses throughout Europe. Um, and she really dominated the culture of the age. This is a time of a lot of middle class moralizing, of doing the right thing, and oftentimes looking down on working class people who did not necessarily conform to those values. And we will also see more working class people attempt to conform to middle class values, less heavy drinking, um, kind of more consumerism during the second half of the 19th century. One of the main themes that we see in Britain during this time is the development of two main political parties, the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party. One of our earliest prime ministers to really work with that political party system was this man right here, Lord Palmerston, who was a prime minister and the dominant political figure for about 15 years. And he really did a lot of compromises to continue his personal support and popularity. So he really didn't try to align with just one political party. He kind of had that Bismarck sort of, I'm going to do whatever it takes to maintain my own authority. Amongst the people. But after this, we really see kind of a division between the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party. And so there's this back and forth between these two men. Now, you should know at least one of them. I've got Benjamin Disraeli in your IDs, who was a conservative prime minister, and these people used to be known as the Tories. And he sort of flip-flopped back and forth with influence, and who was the prime minister with William Gladstone, who was a liberal prime minister. And they often were very competitive with each other. Do not feel like you need to know the exact dates of each man's rule as prime minister. It's just to show you how much kind of oscillation there was between these two political parties in the second half of the 19th century. They were a good kind of good fodder for political cartoons. Here we have them competing as kind of naughty schoolboys and setting a bad example because they were so very competitive with each other. And they really focused in on different issues. Disraeli was very interested in a really aggressive foreign policy and expanding the British Empire. We'll get to that in the next module. Gladstone tended to focus in more on domestic issues. Now, in this competition for political loyalty, there was some interesting compromises made. In 1866, the Liberal government tried to expand suffrage to working class men. That's just part of this liberal ideal of expanding suffrage. Well, the Tories or the Conservative Party was able to prevent that from happening, and then in 1867 they took control of the government. And kind of counterintuitively, the Conservative Party pushed for expanding suffrage to working class men. Now, our Liberal Party tended to be the party of our more kind of middle class bourgeoisie, business owners and managers, and then the super ultra wealthy were part of the conservative class. By the Conservative Party being the one to really push and make this working class vote happen, what they were hoping to do was get those people politically loyal to the Conservative Party over the Liberal Party. So they used this kind of as a political strategy, and it's known as the leap in the dark, because who knows what's going to happen when we expand this Reform Bill of 1832 It gives industrial cities and towns seats in the House of Commons. All men over 21 who were in urban areas were granted the right to vote. So your unskilled worker, your semi-skilled worker, all of them, if you lived in an urban area, were able to vote. And it basically doubled the men who were allowed to vote. But it is not universal suffrage yet. That takes quite a while because there were still significant parts of the population living in agricultural areas. Benjamin Disraeli and the Conservative Party is really noted for their imperialist policies. What we have here is a cartoon on the left of Disraeli, who is handing the crown of Empress of India to Queen Victoria, and then she in turn hands him the crown, the old crown of Great Britain. So he really was looking at using the international sphere in order to gain prestige for himself and his political party. Gladstone, on the other hand, was focused in more on home rule for Ireland. That's in a different video. The Australian Ballot Act, which is also the Secret Ballot Act. Before this, you had to, anyone could know who you voted for, which led to a lot of pressure from your employer for who you were going to vote for. So sometimes it's a secret ballot. They did this in Australia, so it's known as that. This was one of the goals of the Chartists from way back in the 1840s. So if you had a question about how successful were the Chartists, the answer is not during that time period, but eventually most of their requests were granted, and they did meet those goals, just not in that immediate time frame. Another thing that Gladstone did was a third reform bill in 1884, which added 2 million agricultural workers. Again, these are all men. So even with all of these liberal reforms of expanding suffrage and making the voting system more private and allowing and wanting home rule for Ireland, that didn't end up happening. So this liberal policy was not enough for Ireland. They were not able to come to a compromise, and then not enough for a couple other groups like the Fabian Society and a new political party that was developing out of those industrial workers called Keir Hardie's Independent Labour Party. So let's dive into that just a little bit. The Fabian Society were a group of upper class kind of intellectuals who were interested in socialism. Then this is a form of revising Marxism. So they are not interested in overthrowing the government, but they were looking for a complete democracy and economic socialism. But they trended more on the upper middle class end of things. Again, they're more intellectuals. Another group is the Keir Hardie's Independent Labour Party. So this is a third party that was developing, and this is toward the end of the 1800s. And this really attracted people like trade unionists, socialists, those who thought that the conservative and liberal parties were basically just using them to try to get more support, but didn't have actually interest in the needs of the general public. Starting in the early 1900s, one of the ways that liberals try to gain more followers is by appealing to more of those working class people. And so we have a new a liberal chancellor of the Exchequer. His name was David Lloyd George. That means he's kind of like in charge of finance. Presented a people's budget in 1911, and this was part of the whole Parliament Act of 1911, which eliminated the House of Lords as having any kind of government power. It was an attempt to keep the working people in the Liberal Party, and it was eventually forced by King George V, and it was known as the Fourth Reform Bill. So he was interested in maintaining the happiness of the industrial worker in order to maintain peace within Great Britain. What the Labour Party was really looking for was kind of basically the beginning of a welfare state. And welfare sometimes has a negative connotation when it's used in the United States. Welfare truly means the idea of making sure people's needs are met, that their basic needs are met and they're not really truly suffering. So what they were looking was gradual socialization of key industries and utilities, like having the coal mines and the railroad lines controlled by the government. A Workman Compensation Act if you're hurt while you're working, help getting jobs, setting a minimum wage. Social Security for the elderly, old age pensions, and a National Insurance Act. All of these things are very expensive, and they are paid for by taxing the wealthy in order to provide these services for all. So is this socialism? It definitely is. Is this Marxist socialism? No, it has shifted and changed to work within the government, and we see that as a trend in the second half of the 1800s also, is that the governments are more interested in responding to these working class needs rather than dealing with the potential overthrow or revolt of working class people. All of these liberal reforms and socialist reforms were also not enough for this women's suffrage movement. Sometimes these women are called suffragettes, which means female fighters for suffrage or the right to vote. Here we have Millicent Garrett Fawcett, and if you notice on the sign, it says she is a law-abiding suffragette. This is to contrast her with the more militant suffragettes, the Women's Social and Political Union, which was led by Emmeline Pankhurst. She and her daughter Christabel were interested in equal pay for equal work, marriage and divorce laws, opportunities for public service, maternity benefits, and she is known as a militant socialist. They would do things like throw eggs at members of parliament, do hunger strikes, things that were much more violent to try to bring light to the cause of increasing the suffrage for women. When does this happen? Not until 1918. After World War I, women over 30 were given the right to vote, and property qualifications were eliminated in order to be able to vote. And in 1921 or 28, women were able to vote on equal footing with men. So that takes care of our story of Great Britain, which trends to be one of political parties jockeying for power and oftentimes giving these reforms along the way, not because they love the reforms, but because they want to maintain their influence.